Hey, it's Jess. Welcome back. Today I'm here with another Way Back Wednesday where I will be talking about all the books that I read in October of 2022. Looking at my Goodreads, I read a total of 5 books that month. All of them were new, none of them were rereads. The first book I read was The Fervor by Alma Katsu. I read this book because in October that year, Alma Katsu actually came to my library to speak, and she was speaking about this book, so I wanted to read it before I went and listened to her. This is kind of a play on, it's like historical fiction horror. So it's really about like the Japanese internment camps that happened during World War II. There were also these things called like Japanese fire balloons where the Japanese would send these balloons across the Pacific Ocean and they like hit the air currents or something, and so they would land here in America and then like explode. And that's a real thing that happened. So it weaves that into it, but it's also about the Japanese legend of the spider lady. There's a spider demon. So it's kind of like all of that woven together. You're following a couple different perspectives, and it was interesting. I don't read a lot of like historical horror or really historical fiction, so it was very different than what I was used to. I did enjoy it, and I loved getting to hear her talk about how she got this idea and how she incorporated it all into a book. A lot of her books are like this. Like she also wrote The Hunger, which is like a fictionalization of the Donner Party, who are the cannibals that like got stuck in the mountains and they turned into cannibals. And then The Deep is a fictionalization of the Titanic. She likes to take history and morph it into like a horror book, a horror tale. And I thought that was really interesting, and I hadn't read anything like that before, and I haven't read anything like that since. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. The next book I read was Bunny by Mona Awad. This is a book that I had on my shelf, and so again, at the time, was trying to read books that I owned. In this book, you are following Samantha. She is going to graduate school to be a writer, I believe. And the other women in her like cohort or class have joined together and have this group where they all call each other Bunny. And they're like very snobby, well-to-do, rich girls. It reminds me a lot of the Heathers, like the Heathers in the Heathers. I don't know if you've seen that movie or not, but they all call each other Bunny, and she's kind of an outsider. Well, one day she gets invited back to, they call it Smut Salon, so they all hang out together, and things just like go off the rails from there. I don't know what I read in this book. It was very trippy and weird, and trippy and weird. I know a lot of people really, really, really love this book. I enjoyed it. Not my favorite book ever. Haven't read it again. Don't know if I really care to read it again, but liked it enough that I haven't gotten rid of it. So if you're into like weird horror, but not like horror all the way through, there's just like some weird parts in it. It was just weird. It was a weird book. I enjoyed it, but it was just very weird. The next book I read was Upgrade by Blake Crouch. In this book, it's a set in a world where a woman has learned how to like genetically change people's DNA and upgrade them, basically like make them smarter, faster, stronger, and just like super soldiers kind of. And she does this to her brother, and then he goes on the run and he's like fighting her and trying to keep her from doing it to other people. I don't really remember the story. This was not my favorite Blake Crouch. This is probably my least favorite out of the 3 of his that I've read. I liked it. It was okay. I enjoy his writing. I like sci-fi books. This, again, was different than anything I'd ever read before. I just don't really remember a lot about this book. I thought that it was kind of slow and kind of confusing, and I just, again, liked it, didn't love it, wouldn't necessarily read it again. If I'm going to reread a Blake Crouch book, I'm going to reread Recursion. I loved that book. In fact, I want to read it again soon. This one just wasn't for me. The next book I read was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. This is a nonfiction book, an autobiography by Jennette McCurdy. She played Sam in Sam and Cat and iCarly or Victorious. She was in some other Nickelodeon show, and then she was in the spinoff Sam and Cat. I know that because my kids watched that one. This book was so difficult to read because of the subject matter. Jennette talks about she got into show business basically when she was like 4 years old. She became the breadwinner for her family. Her mother was very controlling. It talks a lot about controlling families and money problems and eating disorders and just a really dysfunctional relationship. She also talks about growing up in the Nickelodeon system and kind of like the double standards that are there and how horrible it was to work on the set of a Nickelodeon show. And I don't know, it was just a harrowing read. It was written so well though. Like, you start the book when she's 4, and then the writing style, it's not like she's 4 years old, because obviously it wouldn't be coherent very well. But it's very like simplistic and young, and as she gets older, the writing style evolves and becomes more sophisticated and more detailed, and it was so beautifully done. It was a heartbreaking tale. I read this book, but I heard that she narrates the audiobook, and I bet that is wonderful. Again, at the time, I just really wasn't into audiobooks when I read this book, and so I didn't even consider getting it on audiobook, but I've heard that the audiobook is really good. But I enjoyed reading the physical book too. The last book I read in October of 2022 was The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This is yet again a book that I had on my shelves, so I was trying to read books off of my physical TBR. In this book, you are following 2 twins who are mixed. And one twin decides to stay in their small southern town where the darker your skin, basically like the worse people treat you. And the other sister runs away and is white passing, so she lives her life as a white woman. And so you just hear the stories of how their lives were vastly different. The one sister just disappeared, and the one who stayed in their town never heard from her again. And so it's years and years and years of them being apart. And obviously their lives intertwine back at the end because it's a book, and of course they're going to. I thought that this book was so beautifully written and so different than anything that I had read. Not my normal genre. This is definitely like literary fiction. It's definitely just like fiction, but not horror. I don't know. It's multi-generational. It talks about so many things like race, and it also talks about like sexism and how the girls are treated differently than the boys, and classism, where, you know, how your life is so different when you have a lot of money versus when you're really ridiculously poor. I don't know. It all wove together, and it took a little while for me to get through. It's kind of a chunky book, and parts of it were a little bit slow because, again, it's not something I would normally read. But overall, I'm really glad that I bought this book. I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend, if it sounds interesting, that you check it out. I also found my bookmark in there that I have. This bookmark's been lost for 2 years. I was wondering where it went, and apparently I left it in that book. So I'm glad I pulled that book out so that I found my bookmark. Anyway, those are all the books that I read in October of 2022. Not too many books. I remember in this month, in this year, we were getting ready to put our house on the market to sell, so I didn't have a lot of time to do reading because I was busy like decluttering and packing up my house. And again, at the time, I didn't really listen to audiobooks. So now I would listen to an audiobook while I was doing those things, but back then I didn't do that. So anyway, still pretty happy, had a pretty good reading month, found some really good ones, some that were, none of them were bad, just some of them that I didn't care for as much as others. But anyway, now I want to know, have you read any of these books? What did you think? All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.